Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to show you one of the coolest tricks I know on EdgeTX, and that's how to control your rates and Expo with a slider or a potentiometer. Before I show you the configuration, let me set up the use case really quickly. I've been flying my Katana lately, and I want it to be a little bit more aggressive, but I don't want it to be over the top. So the idea is that I'm going to set up my radio so that I can control my rates and my Expo just by adjusting the potentiometers right here on the top of the radio. You can also use the sliders if you want. So when you hear me refer to the left potentiometer or S1, you can also interchange that with a slider. If you hear me refer to a right potentiometer, you can interchange that with your right slider or your left slider. You don't have to use the same controls I do, but I had to pick something. So in my case, what I'm going to do is use the left potentiometer, that's S1, for my rates, and I'm going to use the right potentiometer, that's S2, for my Expo. All right, let's take a look at the configuration and see how this works. We're going to start out by making curves. The curves are there to govern the endpoints of the control. So in this case, for rates, my S1 knob, I want the endpoints of that to be governed by a curve. So I set up two curves on my radio. One's called RAT, one's called EXP. So when I click on this curve, I made it a 2-point curve, and I set the high and low bound for the weight that I want to use on this airplane. So in my case, on the low side, I want it to be 30, and on the high side, I want it to be 90. Now, it's really important that you think through this. You do not want to use a value of 0 because you could effectively turn your rates off, which means you won't have any control over your craft at all. So in my case, the very minimal weight that I want is 30, and on the high end, the highest weight that I want is 90. So think about how you want these things set up on your plane. You could even use your pitch gauge or whatever other tools you have to set up the radio and give you your ideas on the upper and lower bounds. However it works for you, you need to determine that. In my case, I want my upper and lower bounds to be 30 and 90, and that's for my rate curve. And I did the same thing for Expo. On the second line, I made an Expo curve, and I want my high and low end Expo to be 15 and 80. For a sport plane, that might sound like a lot, but I know on these 3D planes, sometimes the Expo does get up to 70, 75, sometimes 80 on the Expo. And on the low side for sport flying, you might want it something quite a bit lower if your rate's real low, okay? So in my case, I want my Expo for this particular model to be set at 15 on the low and 80 on the high, okay? So those are the boundaries. Remember those numbers, 15 and 80, and then on the rate, we've got 30 and 90, okay? So just remember those numbers. All right, that's the first step, the curves. The next thing we need to do is go to the input screen, and we need to create two new inputs. One is going to be called rate, and the other is going to be called Expo. So on this input screen, just create two new inputs and name one rate and one Expo. And then for the rate, we want the source to be S1. And the idea there is that as we move S1, you can see the indicator on the graph here is moving as I move S1. Now, the next thing we need to do in order to apply that curve so we have a boundary on our rates is you go into this curve section right down here and you select custom and then pick your curve. In my case, I named mine RAT for rate, so I'm going to pick that. And by picking RAT, what happens is I set that high and low end. I can only go as low as 30. Remember those numbers I told you, remember? I can go as low as 30 and I can go as high as 90. That's it. That's as far up and down as my rates can go. This knob will only go down to 30 when I use it for rates, and it will only go up to 90 when I use it for rates on the high end. Okay? So that's the rate curve or the rate input. And the next thing we'll do is create an Expo input. And in this case, we'll name the input name Expo. And I put my Expo on S2. Remember what I said in the opener, you can use your sliders. You can use the other side if you want. You can use whatever you want. I used S1 for rate and an S2 for Expo. So my source is S2 and my weight says 100%, but the custom curve is applied. So in this case, I have my curve applied with Expo, EXP. That's my Expo curve. Now remember what that one does. On the low end, I can go as low as 15, and on the high end, I can go as high as 80. That's as far as I can go. So when I rotate this knob all the way down to the low end, I can go only down to 15, and up the high end, I can only go up to 80. That's as high as I can go for Expo. Okay, the next thing we need to do are make a couple of special functions because we need to make adjustments to global variables to apply these or use these in our radio configuration dynamically. So we will go over to our special function page. The first one, SF1, says switch on. So there's an option on the screen. You scroll all the way down to the bottom and you look for the one that it's called on. And that means that it's always available. Anytime the radio's on, this works. The function will be adjust, and the global variable we're going to change is GV1. Okay, GV1 for the rate. You can use whatever global variable you want. Since I'm only modifying 2 GVs in this particular model, I'm using GV1. So I'll set GV1, and then for mode, we want to pick mixer source, and then under the mixer source, you want that input that we made earlier called rate. Okay, and then last thing you need to do is click enable. And what this does is this sets the radio up so that anytime that rate input is moved, it adjusts GV1 for the value. Let me show you the global variable so you can see it. I'm just going to go back over here to the global variable page, and I'm going to spin my rate knob and watch this value change. See that global variable moving as I change my knob? As I spin S1, it's just moving. As I spin S1, that global variable changes. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the next special function we need to make is the same exact thing for Expo. So in this case, we set the switch to on. The function is adjust. I'm using GV2 for Expo. And then we have to set the mode to use mixer source. And then the mixer source will be the Expo input that we created. Okay. And then, of course, put a little check mark under enable so that it's turned on. And what that does is it allows us to use S2 to adjust global variable number 2. And I'll show you what that looks like. So go over to global variable. We'll look at global variable number 2, which I've named EXP right here. And I'm going to move it. And you should see global variable 2 move as I move my S2 knob right here on the top. Now keep in mind, mine say RAT and EXP because I went into the global variables earlier and I named them. So if you want to name them to keep things consistent, you can do that. You just click on it and put a name in for EXP. That's all I did. Okay, so now we've got global variables being modified with our pot. So as I turn these 2 pots, you can see the global variables for number 1 and number 2 are both changing. That's key to this configuration. All right, to supercharge this configuration, there's a couple of other things I added. So for special function number 3, I've got an option in here for 5 up. That's the T5 switch. 5 up will play the track rate val. Rate val is an Emily audio file I created just for this configuration, and it is available in the Emily requests channel on my Discord. So hop on my Discord and you can download that rate val sound prompt for Emily. And it is the actual Emily, the same exact Emily voice that you get with the Edge official sound card pack. Then the next special function I have is 5 up again, and that one plays the value of rate. That's the input that we created earlier. So it plays that value of the input. Okay. So the idea here is that at any time while you're flying, if you say, hey, that feels pretty good, I want to know what my rate is, you can press the 5 up button and the radio will call out what your rate is at that moment in time. So I'm going to spin the rate knob all the way down to the bottom and we'll press 5 up.
Rate value 30.
See, rate value 30. So Emily called out the rate value. If I put it somewhere near the middle, I'll put it in the middle spot and do 5 up.
Rate value 59.
Rate value 59. So Emily calls out the rate value. And that way, if you want to get rid of this configuration so you don't want to accidentally adjust your rates and expos later after you have it dialed in the way you want, you can get everything set up perfectly and say, I like it right here. Then
64.
Then hit the switch up and you can get your rate value. And then if you hit the switch down, you get expo value. So I'll show you the expo value set up really quickly. We're right down here in special function 5. I have an option for 5 down, and that plays track expo value. Again, this audio track is in the Emily requests channel on my Discord. And then SF6 says when 5 down is activated, play the value of expo. Now, there's another thing you need to do if you want to invoke this 5 up and down trick to play the values. And that's you want to go into flight modes and turn off number 5 and 6 as a trim option. So the reason you do that is because if you don't turn this off, it'll default to equal 0. Every time you press that button, you'll hear a beep. And then eventually, if you keep pressing up, it'll say trim maximum reached. And we don't want to do that. So you simply disable T5 as a trim switch by putting a dash right here. And while I'm at it, I also do T6 in case I want to use it for something else. So T5 and T6 are now disabled as trim switches. that means I can now utilize them as momentary switches in my configuration. And they won't beep, and they're not subject to trim maximum reached, okay? That's why we do that. Okay, we're rounding third and heading for home. We've got our special functions set up. I showed you how to name the global variable. The last thing we need to do is apply the configuration. This part's actually very simple. What we'll do is go into the input screen, and under the inputs, the way I have mine set up is that when my rates are high, I want that to be the mode where I kind of monkey around with things. I want my low rates, or anything that's not high, to be a safe rate to use. So I know on my plane, there's a configuration that I can fly in a kind of a sport mode. It feels very good, very comfortable. The rates are kind of low. The Expo is kind of normal. And so what I do is I have that set for anytime SB is in the mid position or down position, I have that low rate set. And you can see the option here is not SB up. So this second line right here says when SB is not up, I want my weights on my aileron to be 45 and I want my Expo to be 20. And I do the same exact thing on my elevator. I want my elevator to be a weight of 45 and my Expo to be 20. So this SB switch, when I move it to either the middle or bottom position, so if it's in the middle or down, this exclamation SB up means that when it's in the middle position or down, this line is activated. Now here's the application for the changeable rates in Expo that we just set up. We're going to go into the very top line. All you have to do to activate it is go into your input, and for your weight, set it to be your global variable that you applied for your rate. So in my case, I named my GV1 RAT. So for my case, I've got the weight set to use RAT. Now that I've applied my global variable to be my weight when my SB switch is in the up position, now I can adjust my rates with my S1 knob. Notice how the rate goes from -90 all the way to 90. So now if I turn my knob down, I can reduce my rates. I'm going down to now -30 and +30. Remember the 30-90 limits on rates? That's what we were talking about earlier. And I can adjust them anywhere in between that I want. I can, as I'm flying, I might say that feels really good right there. As I do a maneuver, really good right there. Now all I have to do is hit T5 up.
Rate value 46.
And my radio says the rate there is 46. So all I have to do is remember that, or just leave the knob alone. When I get on the ground, I could hard code that value in, and there we go, problem solved. Now let's take a look at Expo. We have the same thing going on for Expo. Notice the Expo curve change as I move S2. You see how the Expo is changing? So right now I've got Expo kind of low. We'll hit T5 down to hear what it says.
Expo value 15.
Expo is only set at 15. That looks about right. Now as I turn my knob to the right, you can see that Expo curve dialing in, right? And I'll press T5 down. We'll hear what it says.
Expo value 80.
Expo value 80. So there you go. There's our rates and Expos on a knob, and we have radio callouts using T5 momentary up for the rates and T5 momentary down for the Expo. So there are more use cases than just 3D flying with this. If you're doing a maiden, you're setting up a plane for the first time, you could set up that range of reason that you like, and then you could constrain those curves even smaller. You could say, well, I know that my rate's going to be somewhere between 40 and 50, but I don't know where yet. And then you could go in and set your curve to have a low end of 40 and a high end of 50. And then you could use the knobs to tune it to your liking. See what I mean? It doesn't have to be a 3D plane setup where you're worried about some crazy level of Expo. All right, that's all I've got on this video. You now know how to set your rates and Expo using S1 and S2. I hope you liked the video. And if you do like this kind of content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when new videos hit the channel. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy. Hey, if you like the work I do here on RC Video Reviews, please consider joining me on Patreon. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me keep making videos just like this one. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description and on your screen.